The great convocation hall of Xylos was a testament to a victory 1,000 cycles in the making. Its crystalline arches soared into an artificially illuminated stratosphere, each facet etched with the sigils of the member species of the Galactic Consortium. Light drawn from a captive singularity at the heart of the capital moon refracted through the carvings, casting shimmering histories upon the polished obsidian floor. The heroic stand of the Cathar Legion, the intricate logistical webs of the Signian hegemony, the harmonizing psionic chorus of the Luminians that had finally broken the will of their foe. The air itself hummed with a quiet, resonant pride, the collective sigh of a galaxy that had faced oblivion and survived. The scourge was broken. Its ravenous, chittering tide had been scoured from 100 contested worlds, its final nest fleets shattered into drifting, frozen husks in the void. Victory was absolute, and yet the silence in the chamber was not one of peace, but of profound, gnawing uncertainty. Grand Marshal Vorlag of the Cathar stood before the central holographic dais, his scaled hands clasped behind his back, his posture a rigid column of military discipline. His reptilian eyes, usually burning with the cold fire of strategic certainty, were narrowed, fixed on the shimmering projection that had stolen the triumph from their grasp. It was a single, unremarkable vessel. It floated at the edge of the now pacified Veridian expanse, a system once bleeding under the Scourge's assault, now a symbol of their reclamation. The ship was a ghost, a splinter of impossibly dense material that gave no energy reading, offered no response to their hails, and betrayed no intention. It had simply appeared, a day cycle ago, materializing from the void without the telltale energy signature of a warp drive or a fold space transition. It was a physical impossibility, a violation of known physics, and it sat in their newly won territory like a silent accusation. "It is a scavenger," rasped Architect Primus Zeth of the Signian hegemony, his multifaceted eyes whirring as they processed the data streams flowing around his personal interface. His chitinous form was a marvel of biological engineering, a living nexus of data and logic. A primitive emboldened by the cessation of hostilities, it detects the wreckage of our final engagement and seeks to plunder the fallen. Its silence is a sign of technological ineptitude, not strength. A single destroyer could atomize it before its crew even registered the threat. Vorlag did not turn. His gaze remained locked on the stark, angular silhouette of the unknown ship. It was deceptively simple, a wedge of utter blackness against the starfield, a shape that seemed to drink the light around it. There was nothing primitive about the way it defied their sensors. His instincts, honed on 100 battlefields, screamed that Zeth's cold logic was a dangerous sedative. Logic could not account for the knot of cold dread coiling in his primary stomach. "Primitives do not materialize from nothingness, Architect Primus." Vorlag's voice was a low growl, echoing slightly in the vast chamber. "They do not possess materials that our deepest scans cannot penetrate, and they do not display the discipline to remain perfectly, utterly still for an entire rotation." From the opposite side of the dais, a soft, chiming light coalesced into the form of Speaker Ileana, the Luminians' chosen emissary. Her being was woven from light and thought, her voice a melody of pure reason. "The Grand Marshal speaks with wisdom. Arrogance is the shroud we weave for our own ignorance. We have just concluded a war that cost us worlds, that extinguished species. We believed the Scourge to be the ultimate test of our resilience. Perhaps the universe is simply reminding us that it possesses an infinite capacity for surprise. This vessel's silence, it feels deliberate. It is a question, not a challenge." Zeth emitted a series of sharp clicks, the Signian equivalent of a dismissive scoff. "A philosophical question, then? We are the Galactic Consortium. We command armadas that have shattered moons. We wield technologies that can ignite stars. We do not answer to questions posed by lone, derelict-class vessels. We act. We secure our borders. We eliminate potential threats before they fester. Send the fleet. Let them answer our hails or be rendered into constituent atoms. The equation is simple." "And if their silence is a sign of contemplation," Ileana's light pulsed gently. "If they are observing us, judging us by our first response, a war of extermination has just ended. Does our victory grant us the right to greet the first new intelligence we encounter with fire? What lesson will that teach them? What lesson will it teach ourselves?" The debate had raged for hours, circling the same intractable point. The object was an anomaly, and the consortium, for all its power, had no protocol for a mystery of Psi's magnitude. Their archives held fragmented data, whispers from pre-consortium deep space probes about a species from a high-gravity world in the galaxy's forgotten western spiral arm. A bipedal, territorial and fractiously tribal species. A species that had, according to the ancient and unreliable records, spent most of its history warring with itself, polluting its own cradle world, and broadcasting frantic, chaotic signals into the void before falling silent. They called themselves humans. The consensus among consortium xenologists was that they had likely self-annihilated long ago, another fleeting candle of intelligence snuffed out by its own immaturity. The ship's design bore a superficial resemblance to some of the cruder schematics in those ancient files, yet its capabilities were anything but crude. "The data is clear," Zeth insisted, his mandibles twitching with irritation. The species designated human was a Class 7 chaotic civilization, prone to illogical acts of aggression, self-interest, and schism. If this vessel is theirs, they have somehow survived their own foolishness and stumbled out of their celestial cradle. They are infants in the galactic theater. They must be taught their place, for their own good and for the stability of the consortium. Vorlag finally turned from the hologram, his heavy gaze falling upon the Signian. "Infants do not forge materials that confound our sensors, Zeth. Infants do not master stealth so profound it borders on a physical law. You see a primitive scavenger. I see a predator that has learned the value of patience. I see a hunter that does not announce its presence until the moment of the strike. The scourge was a tide of unthinking hunger. It was predictable. This is something else. It is an intelligence, a patient, silent, and unknown intelligence." The Grand Marshal stepped forward, his claws clicking softly on the obsidian. "My armadas are victorious. They are seasoned, they are powerful, and they are weary. I will not commit them to an action based on assumptions. We know nothing of this vessel's purpose, its capabilities, or the power that stands behind it. To strike it down would be an act of fear, not of strength, and fear is a luxury we cannot afford." He looked to Ileana, a flicker of respect in his reptilian eyes. "The speaker is right. We must treat this as a first contact, not an incursion. We will send a diplomatic envoy, but it will be escorted. A contingent of my finest cruisers will accompany it. We will extend a hand of greeting, but we will show that our other hand holds a blade." A tense silence settled over the chamber. The logic was undeniable, a show of peaceful intent backed by overwhelming force. It was the cornerstone of Cathar doctrine and the very foundation of the consortium's security policy. As the decision was ratified, a junior Cathar officer entered the hall, his movements stiff with urgency. He approached Vorlag and offered a data slate, his head bowed. Vorlag took it, his eyes scanning the glowing script. The dread in his stomach tightened into a cold, solid knot. He looked back at the hologram, at the single, silent ship. "It seems our decision has been made for us," he announced, his voice a low rumble that carried the weight of a collapsing star. "The lone vessel is no longer alone. It has been joined." The holographic display shimmered and zoomed out. A collective gasp, a whir of agitated optics, a silent pulse of alarm echoed through the vast hall. Where there had been one ship, there were now a dozen. They had not arrived. They had simply appeared. No flash of displaced spacetime, no ripple of gravitational lensing. One moment there was empty void. The next there were ships, each one identical to the first, a shard of absolute blackness, arranged in a silent, perfect formation. They did not broadcast, they did not move, they did not radiate anything. They simply were. The question Ileana had spoken of was no longer being whispered. It was being presented in a chilling, silent chorus from the edge of their hard-won peace. And the Galactic Consortium, the victors of the Scourge War, had no answer. The Consortium diplomatic core vessel, the Stellarch's Grace, was a ship designed to inspire awe and convey unquestionable authority. It was a vessel of sweeping, elegant lines, its hull a shimmering pearlescent white, adorned with the sigils of the founding species. It moved through the void like a celestial cathedral, its powerful engines leaving a trail of shimmering, harmless particles. Flanking it, in stark and brutal contrast, were the Cathar battle cruisers of the 7th Armada. These were ships of war, their hulls a mottled gray and black, bristling with weapon emplacements and sensory spines. They were slabs of weaponized asteroid, their presence a promise of swift and total annihilation. The combination was meant to be a clear message. We come in peace, but we are not to be trifled with. The sage seemed to be lost on the human vessels. Aboard the bridge of the Cathar flagship, the indomitable Will, Sub-Marshal Kalen, watched the human formation on his tactical display. He was Vorlag's most trusted subordinate, a veteran of the deepest scourge hives, a warrior whose courage was matched only by his rigid adherence to protocol. Yet for the first time in his long career, protocol felt like a flimsy shield against a rising tide of the unknown. The human ships remained a void on his sensors. They had mass, their gravitational influence was measurable, but they had no heat signature, no energy output, no radiation leakage. It was as if they were perfectly sealed bottles, containing their energies with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. They were holes in the fabric of spacetime, and their stillness was more unnerving than any hostile maneuver. The Stellark's Grace is broadcasting the standard consortium first contact package on all frequencies, the communications officer reported, his voice tight. Audio, visual, mathematical, psionic, no response. They are receiving it, Kalen growled, his gaze fixed on the main view screen. The Cygnian analysts confirmed their hulls are passively absorbing the transmissions. They are listening. They simply choose not to answer. The diplomatic vessel drew closer, a gleaming jewel approaching a gathering of shadows. The tension on the indomitable Will's bridge was a physical thing, thick and suffocating. Every Cathar warrior stood at their post, claws resting on activation panels, their minds cycling through combat simulations. They were prepared for an ambush, for a sudden display of exotic weaponry, for a psionic assault. They were not prepared for what happened next. A single line of text appeared on their main screen, translated simultaneously into the core languages of the consortium. The font was simple, clean, without adornment. We acknowledge your presence. We mean you no harm. We request a dialogue. The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. The message was not an answer to their multi-layered, culturally sensitive greeting package. It was a simple, direct statement. It was as if a philosopher had been met with a line of code. They have bypassed our diplomatic protocols entirely, the communications officer murmured in disbelief. They are communicating as if this were a simple data exchange. Before Kalen could issue a command, a new message appeared. We propose a secure and unintrusive channel. A representative from your consortium to speak with a representative from Sol, face to face. HOLOGRAMMATICLLY. Kalen felt a prickle of cold unease crawl up his spine. The confidence was staggering. They were dictating the terms of their own first contact. They were not supplicants, not scavengers, not explorers. They were acting as equals, if not superiors. He conferred briefly with the Luminians aboard the Stellark's Grace, their psionic message a cascade of cautious agreement. The risk of refusing was greater than the risk of accepting. A refusal might be interpreted as hostility. An acceptance, at least, would provide intelligence. Acknowledge, Kalen commanded. Accept their terms, but link the transmission feed through our combat computers. Analyze every microsecond of the data stream for hidden code, for psionic residue, for anything. Connection was established instantly. There was no handshake protocol, no data negotiation. One moment there was a blank screen, the next, a hologram flickered into existence on the bridge of the indomitable Will and the Stellark's Grace simultaneously. The figure was humanoid, bipedal, clad in a simple dark gray uniform that bore no rank or insignia. It was a male of the species, his hair short and dark, his face unremarkable save for the profound, unnerving calmness in his eyes. They were eyes that seemed to hold a vast and ancient weariness, a depth of experience that belied his species, supposedly short and chaotic history. He did not look around the bridge, did not react to the sight of the armored Cathar warriors staring at him. He simply stood, his hands held loosely at his sides, and waited. The Luminians' designated diplomat, a being of far greater age and experience than Ileana, began the formal greeting. I am Envoy Orus of the Luminians, speaking for the Galactic Consortium. We greet you in peace and with the light of understanding. We welcome you to this region of space and seek to know your intentions, your people, your story. The human representative listened patiently, his expression unchanging. When the Luminians' flowing, poetic introduction was complete, a long silence followed. The humans seemed to be considering the words, not with confusion, but with a kind of detached, analytical curiosity. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, measured, and devoid of any discernible emotion. The universal translator rendered it with perfect clarity, a baritone resonance that med impossibly steady. I am Elias Vance, designated ambassador of Sol. We appreciate your greeting. Your story is known to us. We have observed its most recent chapter with great interest, the war against the entity you call the Scourge. A ripple of shock went through the bridge crew. Observed? The war had been fought across a dozen sectors, much of it under a blanket of communications, jamming, and interdiction fields. To have observed it in any detail would have required a sensor net of unimaginable scale and sophistication. Kalen stepped forward, his voice a low challenge. You observed our war. From where? Your star system is on the other side of the galaxy. Vance's gaze shifted to Kalen, and for the first time the Cathar felt truly seen. It was not the gaze of a soldier or a politician. It was the gaze of a scholar looking at a specimen, of an ancient being looking upon a child. Distance is a matter of technology submartial, as is visibility. We have been watching this region of space for a very long time. Not you, not your consortium. We were watching the Scourge, and what came before it. The implication hung in the air, heavy and cold. The Cygnian data analysts aboard the Stellark's Grace were already furiously cross-referencing this claim with their own archives, finding no evidence, no trace of such long-range observation. It was impossible. Your victory, Vance continued, his tone remaining perfectly level, is the reason for our presence here today. You have succeeded in your goal. You have eradicated the Scourge from this expanse. You believe you have secured your borders. You are celebrating a conclusion. He paused, and the silence that followed was more impactful than any threat. We are here to inform you that you are mistaken. This was not a conclusion, it was a prelude. Envoy Horus shimmered, his form wavering with psionic distress. Explain your meaning, Ambassador. The Scourge is defeated. Our sensors confirm their network is shattered, their queens destroyed. Their threat is ended. You have destroyed a swarm of insects fleeing a forest fire, Vance stated simply, without malice or condescension. You have mistaken the fleeing refugees for the conflagration itself. The Scourge was not an invading force. It was a desperate, panicked migration. You were not their primary target. You were simply in their way. Kalen's claws tightened into fists. This was an insult, a dismissal of the lives of billions, of the sacrifice of entire fleets. You dare to belittle our struggle? We fought and bled for this victory. We pushed them back, hive by hive, world by world. And we commend your tenacity, Vance replied, his calm unbreaking. Your courage is notable. Your strategies were effective against the entity you faced, but you are celebrating the defeat of a symptom while the disease itself festers unnoticed. You have cleared the field of its weakest occupants. Now the stronger ones will begin to stir. Zeth's voice crackled over the comm from the Stellark's Grace, his tone sharp with indignation and disbelief. This is baseless fear-mongering. We have mapped the local clusters with quantum-level accuracy. There are no other threats of the Scourge's magnitude. Our models are flawless. Vance's expression shifted just for a moment. It was not a smile, but the faintest hint of something akin to pity. It was more unnerving than any sneer. Your models are based on the data you can perceive. There is a great deal that you cannot. Your sensors can detect matter and energy. They can measure gravity and radiation. They cannot, however, detect an absence. They cannot measure a silence that is not merely a lack of sound, but an active, encroaching null state. He raised a hand, and the air beside him shimmered. A new hologram appeared, a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. It was more detailed than any consortium star chart, containing data on stellar nurseries and dark matter currents that their finest astronomers had only theorized about. A section of the galaxy, far out on the rim, beyond the regions the Scourge had emerged from, was highlighted in a deep, pulsating red. You fought the Scourge here, Vance said, indicating the Viridian expanse. They originated from this nebula a few thousand light-years rimward. He then gestured to the vast, red-tinted void. This is where they were fleeing from, a region of space we have designated the Zone of Exclusion. It is a volume of space several 100,000 light-years in diameter, and it is expanding. Expanding? Kalen asked, despite himself. Indeed, slowly but inexorably. Anything that enters it, probes, ships, light itself, does not come out. We sent thousands of long-range probes to investigate over the centuries. None reported back, but they broadcasted until the moment they crossed the perimeter, and their final transmissions were troubling. The laws of physics as we understand them began to fray at the edges. Causality, Akened information theory broke down, and then there was only silence. The human ambassador looked at the assembled aliens, his calm expression now seeming less like a lack of emotion and more like a carefully maintained dam holding back a flood of terrible knowledge. The Scourge did not evolve, it was engineered. A biological weapon of last resort, a terraforming agent gone feral, or perhaps something even stranger. But it was born in that zone, and it fled in terror from whatever now resides there. You have not won a war, members of the consortium. You have simply announced your presence to the thing that made your enemy run. A profound, horrified silence fell over the bridge of the indomitable will. The victory that had defined their generation, the triumph that had been etched into the arches of their great convocation hall, was being recast as a foolish blunder, a child banging a drum in a forest full of ancient predators. "Why?" Kalen finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse. "Why tell us this now? Why reveal yourselves at all?" "Because," Vance said, his gaze meeting the Cathar's, "by defeating the Scourge, you have removed the buffer zone. The entity within the zone of exclusion now has a clear and unobstructed path to this region of the galaxy. Its attention has been drawn by the massive energy expenditure of your war, and according to our projections, it is beginning to stir in a way it has not for millennia. We are here because your victory has endangered us all. Your celebration is premature. The real war has not yet begun." His words hung in the air as his hologram flickered and vanished, leaving behind only the chilling star chart with its pulsating red wound. The channel was closed. The human ships outside remained, silent and still, their black forms a stark testament to the darkness Vance had just described. On the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by the finest warriors of his people, Sub-Marshal Kalen had never felt so small or so profoundly afraid. The message was sent back to Xylos, a burst of data that would shatter the fragile peace of a galaxy and turn a celebration of victory into a wake of impending doom. The revelation sent a shockwave through the highest echelons of the Galactic Consortium. The great convocation hall, once a place of triumphant celebration, was now a theater of grim-faced anxiety. The human star chart burned in the center of the room, the pulsating red of the zone of exclusion, a malevolent eye staring out at them. Zeth's technicians had worked frantically, pushing their most advanced sensor arrays to their absolute limits, probing the region of space the human had indicated. They found nothing. No energy, no matter, no radiation, just a void more perfect and absolute than any natural vacuum. It was, as the human had said, a profound and terrifying silence. They could not see the threat, but they could now see the edges of its absence, a hole in the universe that was, by all indications, growing. "It is a lie, a fabrication?" Zeth's voice was strained, the clicks of his mandibles rapid and agitated. He gestured furiously at the hologram of the human ambassador, frozen in its final, calm statement. "This, human, appears with a fleet of impossible ships and a story of cosmic horror designed to paralyze us with fear. They seek to subordinate us, to dismantle our authority through psychological warfare. They see our power after the war with the Scourge and have concocted this elaborate narrative to make us supplicants. We must not fall for it. We must project strength. We must demand they withdraw from our space or face the might of the consortium Armada." "And what if it is not a lie?" Speaker Ileana's form pulsed with a somber, deep blue light. Her voice was quiet, yet it cut through Zeth's frantic pronouncements. "What if it is a truth so profound and terrible that we have been too blind to see it?" The human's calmness was not that of a conqueror. It was the calm of a physician delivering a terminal diagnosis. "They have offered us a warning, Architect Primus. To dismiss it out of pride would be the height of folly. They have shown us a capability, long-range observation, stealth technology, that far surpasses our own. Is it so illogical to assume their knowledge might surpass our own as well?" Grand Marshal Vorlag stood in silence, his mind a maelstrom. Every strategic instinct, every lesson learned from a lifetime of war was at war with itself. Zeth's argument appealed to his Cathar pride, to the warrior's impulse to meet a perceived challenge with overwhelming force. But Ileana's words resonated with a deeper, colder part of him, the part that had felt the unnerving stillness of the human ships, the part that had looked into Elias Vance's ancient eyes and seen not a liar but a harbinger. He remembered the final, desperate, psionic screams of the Scourge Queens as their hives were shattered. It had not been a cry of defiance. He realized it now with chilling certainty. It had been a cry of terror, a terror directed not at the Cathar warships, but at what they were being driven back towards. "They have made no demands," Vorlag said at last, his voice a low growl that commanded the attention of the entire chamber. "They have not asked for territory, for resources, for fealty. They have stated a fact and offered a warning. Conquerors do not begin their campaigns with lectures on astrophysics and existential threats. They begin with ultimatums and demonstrations of force." "Their fleet's very presence is a demonstration of force," Zeth countered, his form rigid with agitation. "An armada of unknown size and power sitting on our doorstep." "Then let us ask them for a more definitive demonstration," Vorlag declared, his decision solidifying. He strode to the center of the dais, his gaze fixed on the human's frozen image. "Let us test the truth of their words and the depth of their power. We will ask for proof, not of the threat, that is a truth too vast to be proven quickly. We will ask them to prove themselves, to prove the power they hold in reserve. We will ask them to show us why we should listen. He activated his personal comm unit, sending a priority command to Submarshal Kalen in the Viridian Expanse. The message was simple, direct, and laden with colossal risk. It was a request, framed as a challenge. It was broadcast to the silent human fleet, a single line of query from the Grand Marshal of the victorious Galactic Consortium. Your claims are extraordinary. Your power remains unseen. Show U.S. On the bridge of the indomitable will, Kalen and his crew waited, the air thick with the unspoken possibility that they had just provoked their own annihilation. The human fleet remained motionless. For a full minute there was no reply. The silence stretched, tightening nerves to the breaking point. Then a new message from Ambassador Vance appeared on their screen. It was not addressed to the fleet, but to the Consortium High Command on Xylos, patched through Kalen's ship. We do not make THREATS. Our capabilities are not for intimidation. They are for preservation. A demonstration of our offensive power would be an immoral ACT. It would cause fear, and fear is the enemy of reason. We will not do it. A wave of relief mixed with contempt washed through the convocation hall on Xylos. Zeth let out a triumphant series of clicks. Cowards, they posture and then they retreat. Their bluff has been called. They are a paper tiger, a phantom menace. I demand the Armada be mobilized. But Vorlag's eyes were narrowed. This was not the response of a coward. It was the response of an entity operating on a level of ethical reasoning so far beyond their own that it was almost incomprehensible. They refused to demonstrate their power because they feared its psychological effect on the Consortium. It was an act of profound, almost arrogant, restraint. Before Vorlag could voice this thought, a second message from Vance appeared. However, we understand your need for assurance. You cannot trust a warning from a source you do not comprehend. Therefore, we will offer a different kind of demonstration. A demonstration not of power, but of scale, of presence. Grand Marshal VORLAG, Speaker ILYNA, Architect PRIMUSZETH. Please look up. On Xylos in the Great Convocation Hall, a confused murmur spread. Look up. The ceiling of the hall was a solid structure, projecting the artificial sky of the capital moon. But Vorlag understood. The message was for everyone on the planet. He strode to the grand balcony overlooking the capital city, the other council members following, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning apprehension. The sky of Xylos was a familiar sight, a carefully managed tapestry of swirling nebulae and the distant, reassuring glow of the Consortium's core worlds, all projected onto the inside of the planetary shield system. It was a symbol of their mastery over nature, of their ordered and secure existence. As they watched, it began to change. It did not happen with a flash or a sound. It began at the zenith of the sky, a small spot of perfect, featureless black. It was not a shadow. A shadow is the absence of light. This was the absence of everything. It was a hole in the sky, a patch of void so profound it seemed to pull at the senses, and it began to grow. Slowly, silently, inexorably, the darkness spread outwards, extinguishing the projected nebulae and the familiar stars. It was not an eclipse. An eclipse has a penumbra, a corona, a sense of one object passing before another. This was a negation. The light did not dim, it simply ceased to exist, erased by the expanding circle of absolute nothingness. Panic began to rise from the city below. Sirens wailed. The calm, ordered hum of the capital was replaced by a rising tide of fear. On the balcony, Zeth's multifaceted eyes whirred frantically as he tried to access sensor readings, his confidence hattering into a million data points of pure disbelief. Impossible. There is no fleet, no mass. The gravitational sensors are normal. What is this? What is happening? Speaker Ileana's light dimmed to a faint, horrified violet. This is not a technology of matter, she whispered, her voice trembling. This is a technology of space itself. They are not blocking the sky. They are unmaking it. Vorlag stood frozen, his warrior's heart pounding in his chest not with the thrill of battle, but with a primal, bottomless awe that bordered on religious terror. He understood now. The ships in the Viridian Expanse were not their fleet. They were scouts, sentinels, the tip of an unfathomable iceberg. The real human fleet had not just arrived. It had been here all along, waiting, cloaked in a technology that did not just hide them from sight, but removed them from perceivable reality. The darkness spread until it had consumed the entire sky, from horizon to horizon. The capital city of Xylos, the heart of the mighty Galactic Consortium, was plunged into a chilling, starless twilight, illuminated only by the frantic lights of the city itself. And then in the center of that oppressive black vault, a single point of light appeared. And another. And another. Soon the sky was filled with them, thousands upon thousands of them, arranged in a perfect, silent, galactic-scale formation. They were not stars, they were ships. A fleet so vast it defied comprehension, a ghost armada that had been hiding in plain sight, their numbers dwarfing the entire combined might of the consortium. They had not come to conquer. They had come to watch, to wait, and now to warn. They had cloaked the sky in darkness, not as an act of war, but as the quiet, irrefutable answer to a single question: show us. The silence that fell upon Xylos, upon the entire consortium, was more profound than the one in the zone of exclusion. It was the silence of revelation. The silence of a species, of a coalition of worlds, realizing in a single, heart-stopping moment that their entire perception of their place in the universe was, and had always been, a comforting illusion. Their victory over the scourge was not the end of a war. It was the end of their childhood. The demonstration left the Galactic Consortium shattered. Not physically, but psychically, fundamentally. The image of the starless sky, replaced by the silent, endless armada of humanity, was seared into the collective consciousness of every being who had witnessed it. The frantic energy in the great convocation hall had evaporated, replaced by a heavy, solemn gravity. The debate was over. Szeth was silent, his logical frameworks broken by a reality that defied his every axiom. Ileana's light was a steady, thoughtful glow, a beacon of contemplation in the wake of overwhelming revelation. And Vorlag felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was gone, burned away by the sheer, clarifying force of the truth. He was a warrior, and for the first time since the Scourge's defeat, he saw the face of the true enemy, not humanity, but the vast, terrifying ignorance in which his people had lived. A new meeting was requested, not between subordinates in the distant Veridian expanse, but here, in the heart of their power, between Ambassador Vance and the full triumvirate of the consortium. The humans agreed without hesitation. Their fleet, the true fleet, receded back into its impossible cloak of non-existence, and the familiar stars of Xylos returned to the sky, though they now seemed dimmer, less reassuring. The few ships in the Veridian expanse remained silent sentinels. When Elias Vance's hologram appeared once more in the center of the hall, the atmosphere was entirely different. There was no arrogance, no suspicion from the consortium leaders. There was only a deep, abiding respect and 1,000 unanswered questions. "We understand," Vorlag began, his voice devoid of its usual harsh command. It was the voice of a soldier seeking intelligence from a superior officer. "We understand the scale of your presence. Now help us understand your purpose." Vance's expression was unchanged, his calm as profound as the void his ships had commanded. "Our purpose is survival, not just for humanity, but for all complex sentient life in this galactic quadrant. We are not conquerors, Grand Marshal. Our history taught us the folly of that path. We are archivists, sentinels. We are the inheritors of a very old and very painful lesson." He gestured and the star chart reappeared, but this time it was different. It showed the galaxy not as it was now, but as it was millions of years ago, based on their deep-range cosmological surveys. The zone of exclusion was smaller then, a nascent anomaly. But there were other, similar zones, scattered across the star chart like dark stains. "Our galaxy is ancient," Vance said, his voice taking on a narrative, almost mournful tone. "It has given birth to countless civilizations. We found their ruins, their silent monuments on a million dead worlds. The Cathar, the Luminians, the Signians, you are not the first. You are merely the latest. And each cycle the same pattern emerges. Civilizations rise, they spread, they achieve interstellar travel, they form empires and federations. And then they encounter one of the zones. Or rather, one of the zones encounters them. We do not know what they are. Perhaps they are the result of some long-dead civilization's ultimate weapon. Perhaps they are a natural phenomenon of the universe, a kind of cosmic immune system. Or perhaps they are something far, far stranger. All we know is that they are inimical to life and to the laws of physics that support it." He indicated one of the other dark zones on the ancient map. "This one near our home system is what first alerted us. We were a young, fractious species, as your records correctly surmise. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times over. But the proximity of this absolute wrongness, forced us to mature. It gave us a common enemy. Not an enemy to be fought with weapons, but an enemy to be understood, to be outlasted. We turned our aggression and our ingenuity inward, not to conquer each other, but to conquer our own limitations. We learned to be quiet, to be patient, to observe. We engineered our technology not for expansion, but for endurance, for stealth, for a level of self-sufficiency that would allow us to witness the passing of eons. The revelation settled upon the consortium leaders. Humanity's power was not born of ambition, but of fear. A primal, ancient, and deeply intelligent fear. They had not built a conquering armada. They had built a lifeboat, a watchtower, and a shield all in one. The entity you call the Scourge, Vance continued, is a recurring phenomenon. We have seen its like before, emerging from the edges of other zones. They are always the first sign, a wave of terrified, mutated life fleeing the encroaching silence. They are the galaxy's fire alarm, and you in your laudable but short-sighted victory have silenced it. Now the silence itself is the only warning we have left. Ileana pulsed softly. What do you propose we do? You have shown us a threat we cannot see, cannot fight, cannot comprehend. You have shown us that our greatest victory was a catastrophic mistake. What is the next step? Unity, Vance said simply. Your consortium is a remarkable achievement, diverse species working in concert, but it is a partnership of convenience, of mutual defense against a known threat. What is needed now is a deeper integration, a pooling of all knowledge, all resources, all perspectives. Your Cathar martial prowess, your Signian logistical genius, your Luminian philosophical and psionic insight, and our unique perspective, our long view. We do not seek to lead you. We seek to stand with you. We have spent millennia observing. The time for observation is over. The time for action is at hand. Vorlag felt a fire he had not felt in cycles ignite within him. It was not the fire of conquest, but of purpose. The Scourge War had been a war of survival. This was a war for existence itself. What is the first action? Vance's hologram gestured back to the star chart, to the red-rimmed zone of exclusion. At its very heart, a single point of light, previously unnoticed, began to glow. Our long-range sensors have been focused on the heart of the zone for centuries. We believed it to be the source, the epicenter of the phenomenon. For all that time, it has been utterly silent. But in the final moments of your war with the Scourge, as the last Hive Queen was destroyed, it emitted a single, powerful burst of energy. Not random noise, it was a structured signal, a message. The air in the chamber grew cold. A message, Zeth managed, his voice a series of subdued clicks. To whom? We do not know, Vance admitted. It was not a language we could decipher. It was more like a mathematical proof, a statement of cosmic intent. But the most disturbing part was not the signal's content. It was its destination. We traced its trajectory. It was not aimed at your worlds or at ours. It was aimed out of the galaxy entirely, directed at the great void between our galactic spiral and the next. A new image appeared, a rendering from the data Vance's people had managed to collect. It was a construct of impossible scale, sitting at the heart of the zone of exclusion. It was a megastructure, but one whose geometry defied reason. It was a lattice of black, non-reflective material that seemed to fold in on itself, creating angles and dimensions that should not exist. It looked less like a piece of engineering and more like a wound in reality that had been sutured with frozen spacetime. We believe this structure is the source, Vance explained, his voice low and grave. And we believe the Scourge were its former keepers or its prisoners, the signal it sent our best theoretic. Our physicists believe it was a report, a status update. The signal translated roughly to a single, terrifying concept. The field is cleared, the harvest may begin. A silence, more profound than any that had come before, filled the great convocation hall. The petty squabbles, the pride, the victory, it all seemed like the dust of a forgotten age. The Scourge, the zone of exclusion, even the silent human armada, they were all just pieces of a much larger, much older, and much more terrifying puzzle. Vorlag looked at Ileana, then at Zeth. In their expressions, he saw the same dawning realization that he felt in his own heart. Their galaxy was not a lonely cradle of life in a vast, empty universe. It was a garden, a preserve, a farm. And the owners, the beings to whom that chilling message had been sent, were now aware that the pests had been cleared and the crops were ripe. Your warships, Vorlag said, his voice a quiet rumble of awe and resolve. They are not just warships. The way they cloak the sky, that is not stealth technology. Vance gave a single, slow nod. It is not. It is a rudimentary application of the true focus of our science, the manipulation of spacetime itself. Our ships are designed to fold space to create localized pockets of altered physical law. We cannot destroy the zone of exclusion, but we hope to be able to contain it, to build a wall around reality. It is a task we believed we would have to face alone. He looked at the three leaders of the consortium, his calm eyes for the first time holding a glimmer of something beyond detached observation. It was a hint of hope. But now we are no longer alone. The Galactic Consortium and the people of Sol. Our shared history begins today, not as victors or vanquished, not as masters or servants, but as partners, as the first line of defense for a galaxy that does not yet know it is at war. Grand Marshal Vorlag stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Luminians' ethereal light and the Signians' intricate form. He looked at the hologram of the human, the quiet, unassuming representative of a species they had dismissed as primitives, a species that had shouldered a terrible burden in silence for thousands of years. The Galactic Armada had been victorious, yes, but their victory had meant nothing. It was Earth's warships, and the terrible truth they brought with them that now cloaked the sky not in a literal darkness, but in the shadow of a far greater conflict to come. And in that shadow, for the first time, all the disparate lights of the galaxy were preparing to shine as one. The war was over. The true war was about to begin.